So this is the long-awaited lesson for the listening section of the TOEFL exam. Now, just to remind you, we are making a complete course for the TOEFL, so this is actually the second lesson for the whole TOEFL course, okay? So we're gonna leave the links in the description for the complete course, and now we're gonna start with the listening section. Now, just as a quick reminder, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click on the notification bell to be updated with our latest videos, okay? We have tons of videos on the TOEFL and on other exams also. Now, to start with the listening lesson, we have to say that listening is probably the weirdest of all the sections in the TOEFL. Why? Because some people get really high scores and some other ones get really poor ones, okay? So this might end up being the hardest section in the exam, or it might end up being the easiest. It will all depend on how acquainted you are with the English language. I mean, if you watch TV series or movies in English, right? How well you've trained your ear. So that's very important. How used you are to speaking and listening to content in English. So for a lot of people, this is a very easy lesson. For some other ones, it's just a nightmare, okay? But if you watch this lesson to the end, I'm pretty sure, I will guarantee that your score will improve tremendously. So in the listening section, what you're gonna get are audios, recordings. You're gonna listen to some people talk, okay? And then you're gonna answer some questions. Actually, there are two types of recordings you're gonna listen to. First, you have the conversations, and then you have the lectures. Let's talk a little bit about the conversation. So the conversations are anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes long, and basically they involve a conversation between a student, a campus student, and some worker, usually a professor, but not always a professor. It could be somebody who works on campus, right? A security guard, it could be a clerk at the financial aid office, something like that. So you will have a student and you will have some personnel, some staff of the university. Then you will have the lectures. The lectures are just what their name indicates. They are lectures, so they are segments of classes given by a professor, and they will touch on an academic topic, and you will have to take notes just as you would if you were going to the lecture and trying to really pass that course, okay? Pass that class. So that's what listening is about. You have conversations and you have lectures. These lectures are also longer than the conversations. Usually they are anywhere between 5 to 7 minutes. So that's kind of on the long side, right? And you'll have to take notes because, of course, we're gonna talk more about this later, but of course, we don't expect you to memorize 7 minutes of content. That would be just too much. So here we have a little overview of the listening lesson. Overall, you get anywhere from 41 to 57 minutes for the whole section. The time will vary, will be different because sometimes they will give you some experimental questions or some experimental sections. Normally, you're gonna get 2 to 3 segments, all right? 2 to 3 sets, let's say. The first set will contain 1 conversation and 2 lectures, and the second set will always contain 1 conversation and 1 lecture. So overall, you have 2 conversations and 3 lectures. What happens is that if you get the extra set, you will get 1 more conversation and 1 more lecture. And that's why the time might be different in your case. So to get to the mechanics of the exam, this is actually what you're gonna see. So they will play the audio for you and you're gonna get a picture like this for the whole audio. It will be a picture related to the topic, okay? Then you will listen to the audio. You will have to take notes. The audio will only be played once. That's the thing, okay? You cannot replay the audio. So you will have to take good notes to kind of memorize the whole thing, to have the whole structure of what has been said. After they're done playing the audio, you're gonna get 1 question. Now, there is a difference between listening this section and the reading section, because in the reading section, remember, you could go back to answer some previous questions. Here in the listening section, you can do that. So you will have to answer, then you go forward, but you can't go back. So whatever answer you're giving, just make sure you're doing it to the best of your abilities, because in this case, you can go back. So now we have a complete overview. We know the content of the listening section, what they're gonna ask you for, what the times are also. Now we're gonna go over some other stuff, more important stuff, right? The one you're waiting for. So first, I'm gonna touch on the strategies. Strategies you're gonna need to kind of tackle this, approach these listening questions. Okay, and approach also note-taking, things like that. Then we're gonna go over the question types, and at the end, we're gonna go to do some practice, okay? So now let's start with the strategy. But before that though, let me tell you something. Here at Liberty Test Prep, we've got you covered. So we actually have a free PDF in the description below. Go there and click on that link to download that free PDF with tons of exercises for the TOEFL, totally free, okay? So just go there and start practicing. So strategy number 1, note taking. Now, this is the main difference between reading and listening, okay? In the reading section, we said the note taking was not important. We actually didn't want to take notes. On the listening section, that will change dramatically. Here, note taking is a whole different art, okay? It's like an art. That's the way you have to say it. It's very important. It's crucial. Depending on how good your notes are, you are going to get a good score or a bad score, okay? That will determine what score you get, your ability to answer the questions. So basically, on the listening section, you need to take tons of notes, okay? As much notes as you need, all right? The most you can, all the details you can, because you never know if that's going to be asked in a question, okay? So just take as many notes as you can. But the thing here is you have to be organized, okay? And now, in order for you to take good notes, sometimes and what people find the most difficult part is when the audio goes too fast. So you are trying to take notes and you really can't go at the same speed that the person in the audio is speaking. So you need to learn some tips and tricks to be an efficient note taker, okay? So my main advice would be this one: learn abbreviations. Now here, the most important things are nouns and verbs, right? If somebody says, I went to business school, you say business school. That's the only thing you write. And of course, you don't write the whole word, you just write B and then maybe school, right? Then you should also learn some abbreviations for contrast keywords, okay? Because those are very important and usually they signal a very important part of the passage coming along. Okay, so what I use for my contrast keywords would be an H. That H stands for however, okay? So that's what I do. You can just do whatever you want, but just make sure that you have a good abbreviation. You don't want to be changing that word or writing the whole word, but, although, however, on the go, okay? Just put a signal. It could be even a symbol or something like that for those contrast keywords. And do the same thing for resolution keywords, okay? Whenever somebody comes to a conclusion, which is a resolution, is a very important part because they're concluding something. Well, for example, I read a T, right? That T stands for therefore. Also, get acquainted with placing or drawing arrows. Those are very important because they could stand for several things. They could stand for cause-effect relationships. They could also stand for example, increases, decreases, right? Things like that. So those are lifesavers. Now, I'm going to give you an example here of the notes it took for one conversation, okay? So here you have the conversation. This is script only, okay? This is script, of course, it's not an audio. We're going to show an audio later, okay? But this is script, just read it. This is supposed to be a recording. Now, pause the video, read it, and then look at these notes I took. So these are the notes I took for this conversation. And now, what do you see in my notes? Actually, the first thing you see is that I always label the speaker, right? I say student, S for student, P for professor. So I'm always doing that because I need to know who is saying what. That's the most important thing. I need to keep track of the person who's speaking. And then you also notice I use a lot of abbreviations. Now, it'll be good if you study this because then you're gonna know which parts are fluff and which parts are things that are important and might come in questions. After we're done with our notes, we should be able to read our notes and to get the whole story from there. Okay, just be able, by reading our notes, to kind of give a whole story. So kind of every part of the story needs to be inside those notes, okay? Of course, we're going to miss some details. Yes, we're going to miss some details, but we have to be careful that we don't miss too many. And now I'm going to give you an example of the notes I took for this lecture, okay? So again, here we have a script for a lecture, and this, of course, would be an audio, would be a recording. And then here you have my notes, okay? Just pause the video. Okay, read the script and then just resume it and you're going to be able to see my notes here. So here we have my notes, and these notes, the first thing you notice is that it's different from the conversation because I'm not labeling things too much, okay? But I do have numbers, I do have processes, I have the most important piece of information. Sometimes I have diagrams, right? Arrows, things like that signal which parts are important and which ones are not, okay? Because remember, when I sit in a lecture and I take notes, the most important thing is not what the professor thinks or what the professor believes. It's not about an opinion. It's mostly about the content. When you are doing the listening section and you have a lecture in front of you, they are playing an audio for a lecture, you have to think as if you were a student sitting in that class. And then you need to take notes for somebody. Maybe just imagine your classmate, your friend, didn't come to class that day. And then you will have to lend them your notes so he's up to date, right? So you have to take good notes. That's the thing here. You have to take good enough notes for you to know all the main concepts that have been touched upon in that lecture. Strategy number 2, time management. Okay, so we've already gone over the total time for the whole section, okay? But that doesn't help us too much. So actually, on average, you get 35 seconds to answer each question. But of course, that number, that average, doesn't help us too much either, because there are going to be differences among the questions. So some questions are easier than others. Okay, so here are the type of questions, question formats you're going to get. So here you have a single question. So they ask you only for one answer. So it's a multiple choice. You need to provide one answer. Those are the most simple, all right, the simplest. And those should be also the ones that take you the least time. Here you have the double questions. Whenever you see a box, that means that they're asking for more than one question. And of course, those tend to be a little bit more difficult because you have to think a little more, and they will need a little bit more time than the single questions. And sometimes you're going to get this type of questions, okay? These kind of sequence questions in which you will have to organize chronologically. You will have to give an order to these kind of things, to these answer choices. And of course, this will take a little bit more time than the other ones. But remember, not all lectures contain this. And yes, of course, conversations almost never have this. Normally, it's the lectures that do. And then you have this type of questions that kind of give you a chart, right? And conversations never have that one. Usually, these are reserved only for the lectures. But most of the time, they don't have it. So it's very uncommon to see one. But sometimes, I mean, you might get lucky and you might see it. But of course, that will require more time too. So just make sure to organize your time according to the question that you have in front of you. And strategy number 3, trust your notes. Trust your notes, okay? The thing here is that what I want to tell you is that there are a lot of people that kind of want to think their way out of a question. They see a question, they know that they haven't taken any notes of that. They don't really remember, but they want to analyze the question. They want to think it over. They spend some time trying to reason with the question, and then they give their answer. I think that's a huge waste of time. So my take on this is this. If you really haven't taken notes on that piece of information that is being asked, and if you don't remember too well, then just guess. You might as well just guess, okay? That's more efficient. That will require less time. You don't have to think too much. You don't get stressed out. Because if you don't have good notes of the information, and if you don't really remember it, there's no way you're getting it, okay? So that's just a huge waste of time. So just guess in those times. So I also want to emphasize that here, as I mentioned before, on the listening section, the notes, having good notes is everything, okay? Having good notes is everything. Of course, you could rely on your memory. Yes, a lot of people do. But remember, there are, in the lectures at least, up to 7 minutes of information. And there's a lot of information. You're going to see a little lecture here at the end of the video in the practice section, so you get acquainted with it. And you're going to see that most people just don't have a trained enough memory to remember that whole thing. So of course, take good notes. And of course, to take efficient notes, you need to practice a lot. So now that we've completed the strategy, I'm going to show you the question types. So this will be an in-depth analysis of each question type that will come in the listening section of the TOEFL, including textual questions, right? Those that ask you for something has been mentioned, inference questions, etc., okay? With some practice too. So pay close attention. But before that though, if you want to get some free exercises for the TOEFL, we've left a link in the description below to a free PDF with tons of TOEFL exercises, okay? So you have more than enough practice there. So we're going to start right now with lectures. There are 2 main types of questions for lectures, the lookup and the inference questions. You should already be familiar with this type of questions if you've watched our reading course. Okay, if you haven't, then go watch it right now, because remember, reading is the first section of the TOEFL and listening is the second one. Okay, so we already discussed about these 2 types of questions on the reading course. Lookup questions basically ask you for something that has been stated, something that the professor has mentioned. While the inference is a little trickier, it's more difficult because they will ask you for something that hasn't been stated, but that you could interpret based on the statements that they gave, okay? Based on the statements that the professor gave on the lecture. Okay, so here we're going to talk about the question types for the lecture. Okay, there are 3 types of main questions. Of course, there are more, but these are the most important. The question that asks you how, the question that asks you what, and the opinion question. Okay, let's start with the how. So basically, in the lecture, the professor might give you some type of process, step by step. That's what usually happens. Okay, so for example, in the lecture, the professor might be talking about how a certain insect evolves into being a butterfly. So he'll give you 3 steps. The first step, that insect starts as a cocoon, right? Then it grows a little bit and it gets out of the cocoon and it becomes a caterpillar. And at the end, third step, that insect starts growing wings and it becomes a butterfly. Okay, so those 3 steps will be outlined by the professor in the lecture. And then you have to take note of it because most likely they're going to ask you about the whole process, step by step, and they're going to ask you which one's the first, second, third step, something like that. Because if they gave you a process inside the lecture, then that process is very, very important. Okay, so that's going to be the content of the how questions. Now, the second type of question, the what question, will be a much more specific question. Okay, because what will ask you something concrete, right? What did he say? What was mentioned in the passage? Usually something very specific. So a certain point of the passage, and it's the most common question. And the third question type will be the opinion question. Now, just to be clear, not every professor, not every lecture will contain an opinion. Sometimes the professors will just talk about the topic in a very neutral, in a very unbiased way without really having an opinion or without really expressing their opinion. But if they do, then you have to take note of that opinion because it becomes important and they will certainly ask you a question about it. Okay, so now we're going to start with practice here, trying to tackle these question types. Now, here we have a very short example, okay? As I've mentioned before, this is not the real way in which you're going to receive your listening questions. This right here is a script of an audio. It's a very short script. Remember that we mentioned that in the real TOEFL, the audios could be anywhere from 5 to 7 minutes long. Okay, so it's going to be much more than this. So we just have the script for methodological purposes. Also, on the listening section, they will never show you the script of the audio, okay, because that defeats the purpose of listening, of course. So they will just play the audio once, as we talked before, and then you're going to receive a question. So all you'd be seeing on the screen would be the question, okay? So here you have the script because we are going to practice. I'm going to show you how to tackle this question. So in this case here, we have a what question. So it says, according to the passage, what do most people believe about the 20s? So by this time, you should have already read the script. If you haven't, just pause the video and read the whole script, okay? This would be actually a recording, an audio, right? So now, once you have read the script, let's do this. So here we want to focus on the keywords in the question itself. So the question has some keywords. Most people believe. So that should ring, basically. And we should remember that before in the passage, they talked about what most people believe right here, right? So in our notes, actually, we shouldn't have it maybe word by word, but we should have something like people believe. And then what do they believe? That the 20s were a sort of a golden age. So something like people believe gold or good, something like that, but something that indicates what people believe, that they believe that the 20s were good. And if we have that in our notes, and actually if we could remember that, then this question becomes very, very easy. So it becomes very easy. Of course, they were a golden age, so letter A is correct. Number B, they were a time of crime. That's not really what people believe, right? Because they believe it was good and crime is not good. Now, the third one, they believe it was a time of war. Again, we eliminated for the same reasons as B. And then the last one is a tricky one. They were not correctly recorded by writers. Okay, because they're trying to play with something the professor mentioned, right? The professor mentioned, and writers have been very active in pushing this idea. So basically, yeah, I mean, it could be that they were not correctly recorded by writers, but that's not, I mean, we have to focus on the question here. That's not what most people believe. That's what the professor believes. That's his opinion. So the question is about what people believe, not what the professor believes, and therefore we have to eliminate E, and we stay with A. So that's how you answer a specific question. It's very simple, but then you need a lot of practice. Now we go to the next example, and here we have another question. Now something really interesting is happening here, right? They've changed the bullets for some squares. Now whenever this happens, it means that the TOEFL will require more than one answer. Okay, so here they will mention, right, mark 2 or choose 2 answers, something like that. Okay, so basically they will let you know, but then once you see the squares, you know that you will have to provide more than one answer. Normally, you will have to provide 2 answers, okay, but sometimes it could be more. So just be careful with that and always read the question carefully. Read instructions at all times. So this question says, according to the professor, how did the US come out of the Great Depression? So we should remember it was in the latter part of the recording of the lecture. And in our notes, we should have something like this, right? Something about Roosevelt, right? And when he came, he basically he implemented social programs and a new economic policy. Okay, something like that. We should have something about it in our notes. So we're going to use those notes to answer this question. So now let's start reading the answer choices. By instituting social work programs, yes, of course, that's one of the things Roosevelt did, okay? And that took the US out of the Great Depression. So of course, we're gonna choose that one. But of course, again, we need more than one answer. We need another one. Here we have to mark 2 answers, okay? Have to choose 2. Now, second, by decreasing unemployment, this one is kind of tricky. Because yes, they talk about unemployment in the passage, in the lecture. And the professor mentions it, but of course, they never mentioned that before the US came out of the Great Depression, unemployment was reduced. Okay, we could kind of interpret it that those economic policies kind of reduce unemployment, but that's an interpretation, that's an inference. And remember, this is an according to the professor, so most likely this is a lookup question. All right, they're not asking you to infer. This is not an inference question. So we have to just provide answers that have been stated in the passage. So most likely that's not going to be the answer. Number 3, by improving the weather, of course not. And number 4, by putting economic policies into effect. And that's the second one, economic policies. Okay, so if you have good notes, if you have taken good notes, this should be really easy. So again, as we're mentioning, notes are everything. Your note-taking skills they need to be taken into the next level in order for you to get a really high score on the listening section. And also, you are now seeing that it's important for us to kind of identify the question type, right? Because it makes a huge difference if they ask us for an inference and if they ask us for something that has been specifically mentioned, okay? So just be careful about that. So now we come to the third example, and this one is a weird question. Actually, it mixes a lot of question types, right? It's an opinion question. What does the professor seem to think about Roosevelt's election? Okay, that's an opinion question because it's what the professor thinks. But then again, it's an inference. Why? Because of the phrase seem to think. So it hasn't been really, he's never said, I think that blah, blah, blah. But we have to infer because of the way he talked, because of the way he gave the lesson, or he gave the lecture, what he thinks. So that's an inference. And of course, it's also a what question. So it's everything mixed, but predominantly it's an opinion question. So in our notes, we should have taken already some notes about what the professor thinks, especially focusing on these parts. Voice inflection, of course, but also these kind of keywords. If you notice here, you have a word unfortunately. The professor is saying that something happened and it was unfortunate. So that's not the real history. That's most likely what he thinks, right? He doesn't like what happened there. But that's his opinion. That reveals his opinion. And then he says, it wasn't until Roosevelt, also that part, that reveals his opinion because he believes that Roosevelt was the one that fixed everything. And then he said the concrete effort. So those adjectives, concrete, for example, the word, is kind of praising the work of Roosevelt, right? So those things tell us that first, he doesn't like what happened before 1933, and then that he believes that Roosevelt came and fixed everything. So he likes Roosevelt. So we already kind of have his opinion. Let's continue. Okay, so let's start reading the answer choices. It was unfortunate that Roosevelt took office. Of course not, because in our notes, guys, this should be very clear. In our notes, we should have that the professor likes Roosevelt. We should have something like Roosevelt good, Roosevelt okay. We should also have something like starting 1933, the economy improved. Okay, because of that, it wasn't until. So, of course, it's not going to be A. Now, what about B? Before Roosevelt's election, the economy showed some signs of recovery. No, because that goes against our notes, and that goes against this part that says it wasn't until Roosevelt. So, nothing good happened before Roosevelt. Then, number 3, Roosevelt was fundamental for the ending of the Depression. That's a little strong. But it's okay, right? I mean, it could be because the professor likes Roosevelt, and he believes that Roosevelt kind of with his concrete efforts, fix the economy, and that before that, because he says it wasn't until before that, nothing good happened. So that could be. And then at the end, Roosevelt helped improve the weather, and that's out, of course, out of context also. So letter C is our answer. Okay, so that's how you should tackle these opinion questions, especially when they are mixed with inference, because then it becomes a little trickier. So in order to tackle the listening, before getting to the question types, we first have to kind of analyze a little bit the structure. Okay, so the structure most of the time is going to fall into two categories. The first is going to be the problem. Okay, so somehow they're going to give you a problem. The student or somebody, most likely the student, is going to have a problem. And then that will lead us into a reaction or an answer from the other speaker, right? So let's read the first example here. So the student asked the professor to get an extension on the due date for a project, right? And the professor says no, so his offer gets turned down, right? His request gets turned down. Okay, so there is a request and then there is an answer. Okay, so that's a very common dynamic on this conversation audios or recordings. Okay, so you have a problem there. Now let's read example number 2. The student is asking the security officer for his lost backpack. And then the security officer looks for the backpack and gives it to the student. So in this case, there's a positive relationship. The student had a problem and then the other speaker kind of helps him out. So in this case, that's a relationship we have. So basically you get the drift here, right? I mean, the student or one of the speakers is going to go to the other person to ask for something. And then he or she will get an answer to that request. It could be an approval or it could be a disapproval. Okay, now something to analyze here and something that will help you out. A little trick, okay? Normally, when the request exceeds the obligations or the tasks that worker, in this case a professor, is supposed to do, then that offer will get turned down. The professor will just refuse to accept that request. Okay, or any worker, if the student is asking for too much. You should ask yourself, is the professor really obliged? It's part of his responsibilities as a professor to give extensions on the due date for a paper to a single student and not to the whole class? Of course not, right? So we could reasonably expect that request will get turned down. Okay, that's what happens most of the time. If you see the second example, it's part of the obligations, part of the responsibilities of a security officer to help students with their lost belongings. In part that's what they do, right? They kind of prevent people from losing things, from being robbed, from being assaulted inside the premises of the school, right? So that could be part of their responsibilities. So definitely that's why he ends up accepting it. Okay, so just be careful with that. If you feel that the student is asking for too much most of the time and you have a problem situation, right? This kind of dynamic for a question, most likely his or her request will get turned down. Now we come to the second type of format of these conversations, which is the communication. So in these cases, there will not be a problem anymore. So just somebody's going to call somebody else, right? Speaker A is going to call speaker B in order to let him know something, right? To communicate something, but there will not be a problem. So the examples would be something like this. Example number 1, the professor calls a student to let him know that he was chosen to represent the class in a contest. And of course, we're going to also get the answer from the student. But in this case, I mean, the communication is something apparently positive, right? There's not something negative. So we still have to see the answer of the student. In this case, the student likes it, okay? But it could be also that he doesn't like it or he doesn't feel sure about it, okay? It could be any type of answer, but there will be an answer. But initially, there is not a problem. There's just a communication. Now, example number 2, the advisor calls a student to let her know that there are problems with her application. Of course, this is a negative communication. You're communicating something, you're giving bad news, basically, right? And of course, we're going to get a reaction. We're going to get an answer from that student. She might be sad. She might react in some other way, a little bit more aggressive. Who knows, okay? But initially, there is not a big problem. Initially, there is just a communication, maybe a communication of something that went wrong, okay? Communication with some bad implications. So, of course, as we can see here, it could lead into a problem, right? Because, I mean, when you're giving bad news, the student will react in a different way. I mean, it's a problem for them, but I mean, here, there is not a request. There's a difference from the first type of conversations, right? That had a request. This one will not have a request. It's just reporting something. They're communicating something. Of course, that can lead us into a problem, but that problem is not the central part of the audio, of the recording. The thing that is being communicated is the main part, okay? So it's important for you to place the right focus on the right part. So these have been the two types of relationships for conversations, and then we're going to go to the actual question types. But before starting with the question types, we first want to see the notes, all right? What notes should we take and what information should we have in our notes? So in this case, there are 4 main things we want to have in our notes, really 3 of them, 1 is optional. But then, after finishing the conversation, it should be clear what the problem is. In the case, the relationship is that of a problem, and also the request or the notice. Okay, a request in the case the student is asking for something, or the notice in case somebody is communicating something to somebody else, to the other speaker. Okay, then the answer or the reaction, either of the person that is being asked to do something, or the reaction of the person who's getting the news. Okay, we have to have that, the content of the answer. Most likely they will provide an answer. And then bullet number 4 says the explanation for the answer. Sometimes, I mean, this will not always be present in the conversations, but sometimes, for example, if the professor turns the request of the student down, right, he turns it down, then he will explain why. He will explain why he is not accepting that request. Okay, so that explanation is also important for us to have in our notes. So now we're going to get into the question types. So there are 3 types of questions. So we have the why question. They basically ask us about why somebody is requesting something or why somebody is notifying or communicating something to the other speaker. The intention or the effect. What effect they want to get out of that communication or out of that request. And then the what question. The what question is very specific. Okay, it's something really, something has been pinpointed in the passage, in the conversation in this case. And then number 3, the opinion. It will be the opinion of the student or maybe the opinion of the professor or of the worker. Okay, so what they think. So we should also kind of have their reactions down, their feelings, how they feel about the conversation, what they think. Usually they're going to give expressions, right? Like, oh my God, I mean, voice inflections are really important here. So just get the reactions down. So here we're going to start with examples. Now here we have a script, okay? This is not the way you're going to get your conversation in the real TOEFL exam. What they're going to give you is a recording and audio. We already know that, right? Now we have put the script here because that's more illustrative, because of methodological purposes, okay? But in reality, you will not be shown the script. This will be a recording. You will have to listen to it, okay? Now, read the script. Just this is a script for the audio, right? And then pause a video, of course, and then just resume it to start tackling these questions. So now let's read the question. The question says, what does a student go to see the advisor for? Okay, so this is a what question. It's a very specific question. Basically, they're asking us for the request. What's the request of a student? What is she trying to go there for? So that's something, of course, we should have in our notes, right? As we've mentioned before, we must have the request in our notes always. So if we go here to the first line, write an introduction, most likely the request will be given early in the conversation, right? They say, I've been told that my application has been rejected. I'd like to know what's the problem. Okay, so that's what she goes to see the advisor for. She wants to know, to inquire about the problem, why her application was rejected. So she wants to get some information from the advisor. That's a request. She's requesting the advisor to give her information about this problem. So, of course, to apply for the student committee, no. To inquire about the denial of the application, yes, that's the answer. To see Mr. Polk, no. To enroll in a class. So this is very simple if you have good notes, all right? The notes are everything here, but it also helps that you know that whenever you have a conversation with a problem, you must have the request down. There's no other way. If you don't have that request down, that you're going to run into trouble. Of course, you might rely on your memory, but we don't want to do that all the time because these audios for conversations could be up to 4 minutes long, and that's a lot of information. All right, so you should have that in your notes. Okay, so here we have another question. It says, why does the student say this? Okay, this is what we call our replay question. Sometimes they're going to throw some replays in there. Whenever you see these headphones, they signal that something is getting replayed. So basically, they're going to replay a little part of the conversation. They're going to give you a short audio of something that was mentioned before. They're going to give you a short audio of something that was mentioned before. Okay, so for example, this phrase here, oh wait, unless that cooking course does not count towards a full-time status. Okay, so that has been said somewhere in the passage. Now you should kind of know, because of the notes you've taken, they should be detailed, right? You should kind of know where that part was said. Okay, they're going to give you some context, so don't worry about it. Okay, so, but you should kind of know what she's trying to say there, what was happening at that point in the conversation. So let's go here, and it says that the advisor says, because you haven't been enrolled full-time in the last 4 semesters, 2 semesters ago you enrolled only part-time. The student says, that's not true, I took more than 20 credits. Oh wait, unless the cooking course does not count, blah, 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 right? So she says, oh wait, because she's trying to remember something, or she's kind of just realizing that she might not be a full-time student, okay? So this is a why question, basically asking you why the student said this at that time. Okay, so here we have to give a possible reason why her application might have been rejected, maybe, right? She's analyzing a reason. She's still not sure whether that's a reason or not, but she's considering it. Number 2, to let the advisor know that she took a cooking class. No, that's not important. Then why would she say, oh wait, right? And then unless she's saying something negative in there. Maybe that cooking class did not have the effects she wanted to. To say that she did not like the cooking course, it's not about liking or disliking the cooking course. To see whether the advisor approved of the cooking course, no, she's not asking, unless would it make sense, you see? Oh wait, so they're talking here about her full-time status and about the credits she took. So letter A, definitely, okay? So that's how you tackle these replays and these why questions. So now we go to the next question. What does the student think about the cause for the rejection of her application? So this is a what question. It's a specific question. Now they're asking us what she thinks. It's kind of an opinion question, okay? Now, whenever you have an opinion question, you must have understood the student's reactions carefully, okay? So you should have that in your notes. Now, there are 2 options here. If the student in the conversation said, I think blah, 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 and she expressed her opinion, then that becomes a lookup question. That becomes kind of a textual question. But most of the time, the student will not give her opinion, and we will have to interpret her opinion, what she thinks, from her reaction. Okay, so in this case, it becomes an inference question. And that's what happens here. She never says, I think blah, blah, blah. But from her reaction, it's clear to see. It's very easy for us to notice that she doesn't like what happened, right? That she feels uncomfortable, and she kind of feels let down by her advisor because that advisor kind of induced her into making a mistake, taking that cooking course, and she thought that she was going to get some credits for it, and she ended up getting none, okay? So we kind of know what she thinks because of her reaction. So now let's start with A. All right, it was due to a miscommunication. Now, if we remember that part, if we can read it here, she talked to Mr. Polk. And then she says, I told him very clearly. So there was no miscommunication. Whatever she wanted to communicate to Mr. Polk was very clear. And then she says, he approved of the cooking class. So there was not a miscommunication. The communication was clear, it's just that Mr. Polk made a mistake. So letter A can be the answer. Now letter B, it is not her fault. Of course, if she's saying that she communicated her intentions clearly and that Mr. Polk approved of the cooking class, and then at the end she doesn't get any credit for it, it's not her fault. It's Mr. Polk's fault. Of course, they're asking us what she thinks, right? That's her version of the story. Besides, if we remember clearly also, she says, I want to see Mr. Polk immediately. He needs to be accountable for this. Right? Accountable is like he has to be accountable, right? He needs to have the responsibility. He's responsible for this thing that happened, for this mistake. So, of course, she thinks that it's not her fault and it's all Mr. Polk's fault. Number 3, it could not have been prevented. She never talks about prevention. Actually, she says that Mr. Polk made a mistake. She doesn't know why he made that mistake. So if she doesn't know why, or she doesn't really start analyzing the factors, so let Mr. Polk into making this mistake, then we wouldn't really know if it could have been prevented or not. So that's not the answer. Number 4, it will be remedied. We don't know, right? I mean, she doesn't really get to that point yet. She wants to see Mr. Polk in order to make him accountable, not to remedy this. She's not asking for a remedy. She's not really asking the advisor to consider those credits she took in the cooking class. She wants to look for somebody who's guilty, right? She's analyzing guilt, and she wants to see Mr. Polk. But nothing about a remedy. So now the most important part, we're going to give you some free practice. So we're going to show you a full TOEFL lecture, okay? A listening lecture for the TOEFL. It's between 5 to 6 minutes long. So you'll sit down, try to do it as you would in the exam. So no pausing, no replaying, nothing like that, okay? Just to know how you're doing with this section. And at the end, you're going to get 6 questions. Those questions are going to be timed. And then later, you're going to see the answer key. But that's not it though. After that, we have the tips and the tricks.
Now get ready to start the listening lecture. You will first listen to a class lecture and then answer the questions. Now, listen to part of a lecture in a history class.
Recently, people in the media have discussed a lot about a very strange kind of fertilizer called black earth. Some influencers have even suggested that this kind of fertilizer can be eaten by people who want to lose weight. Something like a weight loss magic pill. But do you know what black earth is? It is actually a very dense and nutritious soil, full of thousands of strains of microbes living together inside the soil. This soil is stickier than the normal one and has 5 times its density. For several years now, it has been known that if you put just a little bit of black earth, let's say around 10 grams per square foot, into barren soil, it will immediately turn fertile. It is really that marvelous. Black earth was first discovered in the deep Amazon rainforest by an archaeologist named TOEFL. He was on an expedition trying to find the mystical city of El Dorado in the late 1800s when he heard from local people about this magical gift that had been left to their tribe by the Pachamama, or the motherland, as they called it. Lepong and his team stayed for several years in the Amazon basin and became really good friends with the Peruvian natives. As a farewell present, the chief of the tribe gave Lepong a little bit of black earth, or terra preta, as it is called by the natives. Without really understanding too much about it, Lepong brought this gift to France and kept it in a tightly sealed jar. Several years after his death, this jar was opened and the contents inside of it were studied carefully in a local laboratory. What scientists found was completely mind-blowing. This black earth contained up to 500,000 strains of bacteria, many of which were unknown at the time. Scientists identified at least 7,000 strains of bacteria related to the Streptococcus strain. But what was really amazing was that these bacteria were harmless. So instead of giving you a sore throat and fever, they helped the soil become more fertile. As I told you before, only 10 grams of this microbe-rich soil is enough to turn 1 square foot of barren soil into a totally fertile soil once again, capable of growing any kind of crop. For years, scientists have been wondering how this black earth came to be and why it has been found only in the Amazon. Because believe me, ever since it was first discovered, scientists have been trying to find soils similar to black earth all around the world, without any success. So just to be brief, all the theories conceiving black earth as a natural soil have been disproven. So basically, scientists are pretty sure that black earth is a man-made soil, developed by the ancient Amazonian tribes. Nowadays, scientists also have a pretty good theory for the process in which black earth was created. So first, some soil had to be heated to a certain temperature, around 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Then an initial set of compost was put in the soil. The second step was way more difficult. As the Amazon didn't contain all the strains of bacteria that were necessary to create black earth, ancient tribe leaders had to travel in search of compost and decayed organic material from other places, including decayed fish from the Pacific Ocean. The third step was to enrich the strains of bacteria in the soil by feeding it with different kinds of Amazonian fruit and sugars, and letting the bacteria feed off it for a long period of time, of up to 5 years. During this process, the soil would be placed in a hole near a river because humidity was crucial, and then it was covered with charcoal. It is not clear how many repetitions of this process were necessary, but scientists speculate that it took no less than 5 repetitions. And then you have it. You have rich black earth. Black earth is not only important due to its practical use as a fertilizer in modern agriculture, which of course, as you might expect, black earth is a very revolutionary technology. However, there is another important aspect of this discovery. For centuries, the Amazon basin has been seen as a place in which nothing ever lived, in which no civilization could possibly have flourished. Besides being completely covered by a dense forest, one of the major criticisms to the theories about civilizations in the Amazon was precisely that the Amazonian soil was a very poor soil. As you might understand, all the ancient civilizations heavily dependent on agriculture to feed their members. So a big and strong civilization could only have flourished in a place in which the soil was rich. So the advent of Black Earth could very well lead us into a revision of history.
Question 1. The professor mentions several suggested uses of black earth. Which are some of them? Question 2. What is black earth? Question 3. According to the professor, how modern science came to know about black earth? Question 4. In this passage the professor indicates the steps scientists believe are necessary to create black earth. Select the ones that apply. Question 5. Listen again to part of the conversation and then answer the question.
Black earth is not only important due to its practical use as a fertilizer in modern agriculture, which of course, as you might expect, black earth is a very revolutionary technology.
Why does the professor say this?
Which of course, as you might expect, black earth is a very revolutionary technology.
Question 6. According to the lecture, which is one criticism made to the idea that ancient civilizations developed in the Amazon basin? You have finished the listening lecture exercise. Now you will see the answer keys.
So how did you do with it? Just let me know here in the box below, in the comments below. I want to know how you did with this practice test. So now to the tips and tricks. The first tip I can give you is you need total concentration for this, okay? There are a lot of people who get distracted very easily. So my main advice would be when you're practicing, not only on the actual exam, when you're practicing, close your eyes and just get yourself involved in the lecture. Okay, it would be better also if you are in a place with no distractions, right? Even some people might even be better just facing the wall, all right? Just place your laptop such that you're facing the wall and then you can practice. So you have no visual distractions. Close your eyes. Imagine that you are inside the story. Imagine that you are seeing those people talk in the case it's a conversation. Imagine that you're in the classroom in case that it's a lecture. Okay, but you need to be there because if you feel that you're physically there, you're going to pay close attention and your whole understanding, your whole comprehension of the concepts, of the content that is in that recording will improve dramatically. So remember, if you find that you're getting distracted too easily, just close your eyes. Okay, close your eyes. So tip and trick number 2, and this is something I get asked a lot, and it's about accents. Okay, so a lot of people write me and they tell me, you know what, I'm practicing for the TOEFL listening section, and then I don't know which audios I should be practicing with which recordings, which material I should be choosing, because there are speakers inside those recordings, right, talking with different accents. So my take is very clear on this. The TOEFL is an American-made exam, okay, and most business schools that accept the TOEFL are in the United States. So just practice with American accents. Now, inside the United States, there are tons of different accents, okay, but there is a neutral kind of a standard accent that you'll find in all Hollywood movies, kind of on all TV series, things like that. Of course, not all Americans talk like that in their day-to-day lives, but whenever they're in front of a camera, they try to, right? So that's the accent you should be practicing with. So most speakers you're going to find on the TOEFL listening section will have an American neutral accent. To just practice with that, okay? Tip and trick number 3, and this is something extremely important and that I use a lot when I'm tutoring for the TOEFL for my students. There are 2 different ways you should approach this TOEFL practice, okay, for the listening section. There is one way that works better for people that have a trained ear, so some people that already can understand English, spoken English, okay, that can have a conversation. Those people need to practice in a certain way. And there's another type of training, practicing, that people that really cannot understand English too well need to do, all right, need to follow. Now, how do you know whether you understand English or not? You sit down in front of the TV, just try to watch a show in English, a program. If you understand most words, then you're okay. If you don't understand most words, then that means that your ear is not trained enough. Now, if you understand English, if you're able to watch movies in English, TV series, and you don't really get lost, then you're okay. This section is going to be easy for you. Okay, just practice a little bit, and you should be practicing with TOEFL official material. So you should be doing listening section exercises, right? The lecture and the questions. So basically just exam mocks. But in case you have problems with the section, in case your ear is not trained enough to understand the whole episode of your favorite TV show in English, then you need to have a different type of practicing. So what I would recommend here is don't start practicing with TOEFL official material because you're going to burn it. You're going to waste it. Okay, that's not good for you. You should touch those at the end. First, what you should be doing is just to train your ear. The best way I've found for you to train your ear is to do scripts. So I have a whole video here actually on scripts. Okay, scripts are marvelous. Scripts are a nuclear weapon. Okay, I've seen so many people get so much better in a few weeks. Okay, just train their ear in a few weeks to just train their ear to kind of understand English out of nowhere, actually. Okay, so they really work. Okay, if you want to watch a whole video, just go to the description. I've left a link. So basically the way you do scripts is this. You go to any video on YouTube, a video that has a person with an American neutral accent talking something academic usually, all right? Something that it's not, they're not entertainment. So they're talking about concept, they're kind of giving out information. Then you have to make sure that there are official captions, subtitles for that video, all right? And they need to be official, right? Because you need to know that those are human-made. And then you just sit down, you turn off those caps and try to listen to it. Then you open up a Word file and start typing everything you listen to. So trial and error. This will take several hours, maybe several days, but little by little, you'll be improving your ear. That's how it is. This is the fastest way. Basically, you're kind of forcing your ear to get better. And this is a marvelous tool. It works 100% of the time. Then at the end, after you're done with that audio, you go and you compare it to the official captions and you see how many words you've gotten wrong. And then when you see that there's a difference between the words you've taken, so the ones you've transcribed, and the ones in the official captions, then you go to that specific part of the video and you see what went wrong. Then you try to listen to that word over and over and kind of you train your ear that way. Okay, it's free. That's a good thing, but it does need a lot of effort, but it's also very fast. And that's the fastest route for you to get better at listening. And once you've improved your level, then you can start practicing with TOEFL official material, with exam mocks, okay? But not before. Never before, because that's just a waste of time. Tip number 4, pay attention to voice inflections. Okay, and this also made your difference between the reading section and the listening section. Why? Because in the reading section, you can really tell the mood of the person that's speaking through their voice, right? You actually get the mood by the words that are being written, but not because of the voice. Now, on the listening section, you do have voice inflections. Sometimes people are going to express anger in their voice. Yo, what's up? Sometimes they're going to express disappointment. Did I do that? Kind of thing. So you need to pay close attention to those voice inflections. Sometimes they're also going to place more emphasis on certain words. And whenever they're emphasizing words, remember that's going to come in a question. So what will happen if I say, I talked to Mr. Polk before enrolling in this class? And then I change that and I say, I talked to Mr. Polk before enrolling in this class. So that's totally different. And that's how you show when you're speaking where this, what your mood is, first of all, and then where this conversation is going. Okay, so voice inflections are very important. So don't forget to download the PDF, the link is in the description below, with free exercises for the TOEFL. Okay, so you really have no excuse here. You have no excuse to not practice. Just download the file and start practicing. And also don't forget, please, to subscribe to this channel so you can keep on receiving these videos, okay? We're putting out a whole course, a complete course for the TOEFL. Actually, it's the first course, the first complete course on YouTube. Click on the notification bell so you get a notification every time we upload a new video. And also leave us a comment because we want to know how to improve these lessons, okay? We want to know what you think about it. So that's been it with me. My name is Rod. I'm with Liberty Test Prep, and thank you very much for your attention.